Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're diving deep into a single, absolutely crucial case for anyone studying environmental law in India. Think of this as a special masterclass on the Indian Council for Enviro-Legal Action versus the Union of India. If you've got this on your syllabus, you're going to want to pay close attention, because this case literally changed the game for corporate responsibility and environmental justice.
All right, let's get right into the source material. We're looking at the official Supreme Court report here. This isn't just a summary. This is the actual text that laid down some of the most powerful legal principles we have today. And trust me, it reads like more than just a legal document. It's a story about a small village's desperate fight for survival, a story of shocking corporate arrogance, and a defining moment for India's Supreme Court. Understanding this decision is non-negotiable. So here's how we're going to break it all down. We've got 6 parts. First, we'll look at what actually happened, the disaster itself. Then, the long legal fight. Third, the hard evidence that blew the case wide open. Fourth, and this is super important for your exams, the legal principles at play. Fifth, we'll look at the Supreme Court's final verdict. And finally, we'll talk about why this case is still so incredibly important today. Okay, let's set the scene. To really get this case, you have to understand what was happening on the ground. We're heading to a small village called Bichri in Rajasthan, which became the unwilling host to a full-blown, man-made environmental nightmare.
The main culprits here are a group of companies, respondents 4 to 8 in the case. Think names like Silver Chemicals and Jyoti Chemicals. Now, on paper, they were all different companies. But, and this is a critical point the court picked up on, they were all basically run by the same people, operating like one giant entity. Remember that, it becomes a big deal later.
So what were they making? Something called H-acid. And here's the kicker. It was made only for export. Think about that for a second. The profit from this chemical was being sent overseas, but the waste, this incredibly dangerous, toxic sludge, was being left right there in India. It's a classic case of privatizing the profits while socializing the environmental costs. And we are not talking about a small amount of waste here. The sheer scale was just mind-boggling. They churned out thousands upon thousands of metric tons of this toxic gunk. So what do you do with thousands of tons of toxic sludge? Well, if you're these companies, you just dump it. That's it. No treatment, no containment. They literally just threw it out in the open. And from there, all those nasty chemicals soaked down deep into the earth, poisoning the aquifers. You know, those underground water reserves that everyone in the area relies on. For the people living in Bichri village, the result was an absolute apocalypse. Their wells, their streams, their only sources of water turned dark and disgusting. You couldn't drink it, you couldn't water your crops with it. The soil itself was poisoned, making it impossible to grow anything. People got sick, livestock died, and the entire village economy, which depended on that land and water, completely collapsed. So, with their lives and livelihoods destroyed, the villagers had to fight back. This brings us to the next chapter, the long, drawn-out legal battle, and what can only be described as a decade of pure defiance from the companies involved. Now, looking at this timeline, you can see that justice was anything but fast. A public interest litigation, or PIL, gets things started in 1989, and the Supreme Court moves pretty quickly, ordering investigations and telling the companies to contain the sludge. But then, nothing. For years, the respondents just ignored the court's orders. They dragged their feet, they made excuses, and the pollution just kept getting worse, so much so that another petition had to be filed. And you know it's bad when the court itself starts using language like this. This quote from the judgment is so telling. The court saw right through it. This wasn't just a mistake or an oversight. It was a brazen display of contempt for the law and for the court itself. This attitude problem was definitely a huge factor in the final harsh verdict. So you have a situation where the companies are basically denying everything and ignoring the court. How do you definitively prove that their factory caused this pollution? How do you build an airtight case? Well, you turn to the experts. This is where science really becomes the hero of the story. The court brought in the National Environmental Engineering Research Institute, or NERI, to go in and figure out exactly what was going on. These scientific reports became the absolute foundation of the court's decision, providing the cold, hard facts that were impossible to deny. And what NERI found was, well, it was a bombshell. First, they put a number on it. Nearly 2,500 tons of sludge and over 8,000 cubic meters of toxic wastewater. Then, the smoking gun. They scientifically proved the link between that specific sludge and the poison in the groundwater. They even found that the companies had tried to hide the sludge by burying it. They confirmed that the court's orders to safely store the waste had been mostly ignored. And to top it all off, they found that other plants in the same complex were still polluting. It was a complete and utter indictment. This line from the report was the final nail in the coffin. That phrase, beyond doubt, that's incredibly powerful. In the legal world, that's a slam dunk. There was no more room for excuses or denial. The science was crystal clear, the source was pinpointed, and the blame was squarely on the respondents. Okay, everyone, highlighters out. This next part is the absolute core of the case and something you need to know for your exams. Given all this evidence, what legal tools did the Supreme Court use to bring down the hammer? This is where legal history was made. So, the court leaned hard on the principle of absolute liability. Now, the Old English rule of strict liability had all these exceptions, these little escape hatches an industry could use to get off the hook. But the Indian Supreme Court, in an earlier landmark case, said, nope, not good enough for India. They created absolute liability, and this court confirmed it. If you run an inherently dangerous business, your liability is absolute, full stop. No exceptions, no excuses. If you cause harm, you are 100% responsible. And coupled with that was the second big weapon, the polluters pays principle. It's such a simple, common-sense idea. The court made it crystal clear that the company that causes the pollution is the one responsible for paying to clean it up. You can't just make a mess, take your profits, and expect the government or the public to foot the bill for the damage. You broke it, you buy it. All right, so with these two powerful principles, absolute liability and polluter pays, let's see what the Supreme Court actually did. How did they turn these legal ideas into real-world justice for the people of Bitri? First off, the court did not hold back in its language. I mean, wow. Calling a company a rogue industry in a judgment is a massive deal. It sent a powerful signal that this wasn't just a business that made a mistake. This was a business that had acted completely outside the bounds of the law and basic human decency, all for the sake of profit. And the court's orders were incredibly practical and forceful. It was a clear, step-by-step plan. Step 1, figure out exactly how much it will cost to clean up this mess. Step 2, make the polluters pay that amount. Step 3, and this is crucial, give the orders some teeth. If they don't pay up, seize their factories and sell everything. Step 4, shut them down for good to make sure this never happens again. Step 5, empower the villagers to sue for their personal losses. And finally, Step 6, look at the bigger picture and tell the government to rethink how it regulates these kinds of dangerous industries nationwide. So let's step back for a moment. This all happened back in 1996. Why is this case still a cornerstone of environmental law in India? Why are you studying it today? Let's talk about the legacy. The impact of this judgment is just massive. It took the idea of absolute liability and cemented it into law, removing all the loopholes for hazardous industries. It formally established the polluter pays principle as a fundamental rule in India. It also gave a huge boost of confidence to the government, confirming its power to take strong action under the Environment Protection Act. And, importantly, it was a tremendous victory for public interest litigation, showing that regular citizens, with the help of the courts, could stand up to massive corporations and actually win. And that brings us to the big question that I want to leave you with. This case created the legal tools to fight pollution, but has it worked? Have these powerful principles actually changed how industries operate? Or have fines and remediation costs just become another predictable expense on a company's balance sheet, another cost of doing business? As the next generation of lawyers, that's something you'll be dealing with. Thanks so much for joining me for this deep dive.